told this story exactly 3 times in my life. Once to my wife, on the night we arrived in this country, and she asked me what I was thinking about as I stood at the window watching the street. Once to my son, when he was old enough to sit still, and I judged him old enough to bear it. And now, once more here, because I am 79 years old, and the doctors have said what the doctors say, and I do not want the boy's name, the only part of him I kept, to go into the ground with me. His name was Tobias. I never learned the rest of it. It was the winter of 1943, though the exact month has blurred in the way that extreme cold blurs everything it touches. I was 52 then, a schoolteacher from Krakow, and I had been a schoolteacher for long enough that I could still, out of habit, assess a child's age from across a crowded room. He was 13, perhaps 14 at the outside, a slight boy with dark eyes set wide apart and a leather satchel across one shoulder that was clearly too large for him, the straps cinched up almost to his ear. In his arms he carried an accordion, the way you carry something you have been told to carry and have not yet decided what to do with. The platform was covered, which was something. Iron rafters, soot-blackened stone. The light came from 3 weak electric bulbs, strung between the columns, and from what pale sky leaked in at either end, and neither source was equal to the task of lighting the place. So there was a permanent dusk at the center of the platform, where most of us stood, pressed together for warmth that none of us had. There were perhaps 300 people. There were 2 German soldiers at the far end, and a civilian clerk in a gray coat near the gate. And there was the sound of boots on stone, and the distant mechanical breathing of a locomotive that had not yet arrived. Someone near me said that we were waiting for a connecting transport from another district. 2 hours, perhaps 3. The clerk had told someone this. He wanted us quiet. The word came back through the crowd. He wanted no noise. It was then that I saw Tobias receive his instruction. The clerk had spotted the accordion. He pointed at the boy, then pointed down the platform, a gesture that said, "Over there, away from the gate, and make yourself useful." The boy looked at the clerk, then at the direction indicated, then moved. He was unhurried in the way that children are sometimes unhurried under great pressure. Not from calm, I think. From a suspension of the ordinary rules of urgency, everything re-weighted. He walked to the far end of the platform, where the light was worst. I watched because I was a teacher, and watching children was the reflex of 30 years. I saw him set down his satchel against the wall and lift the accordion strap over his head. I saw him look at the instrument with an expression I have never been able to name precisely. Not reluctance. Something more like a question he was asking himself quietly before he answered it. And then he saw the piano. It was an upright. An old dark-stained thing shoved against the wall beneath a column, half hidden behind a porter's trolley that had no porter. Someone's discarded furniture, I thought. A station master's or a waiting room piano moved out and forgotten. 2 of its legs were different heights. The fall board was down. Tobias set the accordion on the floor, stood before the piano for a moment, and then he raised the fall board and looked at the keys the way a man looks at a window when he has been inside a long time. He sat down on the trolley's edge, which was the wrong height, too low. He adjusted himself. He placed both hands on the keys without pressing them, just resting there, feeling the cool of the ivory. Then he pressed one note. It rang out cleanly in that cold stone space. A single B-flat, nothing more. And a dozen people near him turned their heads, not toward him, away from their own thoughts, which is a different thing. The note decayed slowly, the way notes do in large empty spaces, and in its decay I heard that the piano, miraculously, was nearly in tune. Someone had tuned it within the last year. That seemed to me, then and now, one of the most improbable facts of Ray. He played a chord next, his left hand, the bass, a simple open fifth, and then, very softly, his right hand began to pick out a melody. I knew the melody. Everyone on that platform knew it. It was a lullaby. I will not name it because the name is not the point and the note is, but it was the kind of lullaby that is nobody's exclusively, that belongs to every mother who has sung in a low voice in a dark room to a child who will not sleep. He played it plainly at first, without embellishment, and for a few bars it was only a lullaby played on an unattended piano by a boy who had no business being there. Then something changed. I cannot locate the precise moment. It was not a single note or a single bar. It was more like watching a light change. The way the quality of morning light shifts in the last minutes before full day, and you cannot catch the instant of the shift. Only the before and the after. The melody was still there, underneath everything. Tobias had begun to do something with it that I did not have the musical education to name, and still do not. He was pulling it open, extending it. The left hand had become something more complex, rolling arpeggios that rose up through the bass, and caught the melody from below and carried it, and the right hand began to elaborate, small variations at first, then wider ones, then phrases that departed from the lullaby entirely, and went somewhere else, somewhere that was nonetheless connected to it by some invisible thread of feeling. I had moved without knowing I had moved. I was 10 feet closer to him than I had been. The people near me had stopped talking. I became aware of this gradually, and then all at once, the way you become aware of silence, by its completeness. Not just the people nearest the piano but further back, in the middle of the platform, the whispering and shuffling and low consoling murmur that 300 frightened people make when they are trying to keep themselves steady, it had stopped. I turned and looked. People were standing very still. Some had their eyes closed. A woman I did not know had one hand pressed flat to her sternum as though checking her own heart. An elderly man, he was perhaps 80. He had the look of a man who had already survived several possible things. Had tears running straight down a face that was otherwise perfectly composed, and he did not seem to know it. I turned back to the boy. Tobias was playing with his eyes closed now, and his whole body had changed. The self-consciousness of a 13-year-old, the braced shoulders, the careful arrangement of the face for a watching world, had dissolved. He was as somewhere else entirely. His right hand reached up the keyboard and struck a chord high and sustained, and in the reverberations of that chord the lullaby came back, but transformed, carrying now everything that had happened in the preceding minutes. All the harmonic distance traveled, and it was unbearable in the way that certain beauty is unbearable, the kind that is sorrow welded into its core so deeply that you cannot experience the beauty without the sorrow and not want to. I heard a sound near the gate. The clerk in the gray coat had stopped writing. He was standing with his ledger open in both hands and his pen arrested in the air above the page, and he was looking down the platform at the boy. His face, I studied it. I could not help studying it. It was the only German face I had looked at with anything other than fear in 2 years. His face had the expression of a man who has walked into a room, expecting to find one thing, and has something so entirely different that the categories have not yet sorted themselves out. He did not move. The pen did not descend to the page. He stood there. It played for perhaps 3 minutes in total, perhaps 4. Time was not functioning normally. He came back to the lullaby for the final passage, the plain melody, unadorned, the way he had begun, and played it through once more, and then once more very softly, and then he let the final chord ring and ring and ring until the stone room had absorbed the last of it, and he lifted his hands from the keys and folded them in his lap and sat looking at the fallboard. No one moved for a moment that I cannot measure. The woman with her hand on her sternum made a sound, not a sob, something quieter, something that was perhaps the sound a person makes when they return to themselves. And it broke the silence gently, the way a stone dropped into still water breaks it, and around that ripple things began to move again. People exhaled. Someone wept openly. The old man with the composed face and the running tears turned to the stranger beside him and said something I could not hear, and the stranger nodded. Tobias picked up his accordion from the floor. He did not look at the crowd. He settled the strap over his shoulder, picked up his satchel, and stood with his back against the column in the posture of a boy, waiting to be told what to do next. The clerk at the gate had lowered his ledger. He did not speak. He looked at the boy for a moment longer, then turned back to the gate and resumed his writing. That was all. The transport arrived 40 minutes later. In the confusion of boarding, I lost sight of Tobias. I looked for him. I looked for the satchel, the too long strap. The accordion held slightly away from the body, but there were 300 people moving, and the light was poor, and I did not find him. I did not find him. I have thought about that piano many times in the 70 years since. The tuned piano, abandoned under a column in a deportation depot, as though placed there by some arrangement I was not in a position to understand. I have thought about the clerk who stopped writing. I have thought about the old man's tears on his composed face. But most of all, I have thought about Tobias. The boy who looked at those keys the way a man looks at a window, who played a lullaby for 300 terrified people, and made them feel, for the length of a few minutes, that they were still themselves. I never learned his surname. I have carried his first for 70 years like a coin kept in a pocket, taken out sometimes, over in the hand, put back. It has not worn smooth. Some things do not. His name was Tobias. He played us back to ourselves when we had nearly forgotten the way.